Rachel Carver, 35. I run logistics for a medical supply outfit just outside Columbus, Ohio. And the night my family's whole performance came apart, I was standing in my mother's dining room holding a sweet potato casserole fresh out of the oven. The dish was still hot through the towel. I could feel it on the inside of my wrists. My older brother Damon was already 3 glasses deep. He tipped his chair back, dragged his eyes up and down me like I was a smudge on the wallpaper, and said it loud enough that the kids at the other table heard him too. "So sis, how's life on the useless side of the family?" A couple of people did that small, uncomfortable laugh. You know the one. The laugh you let out when somebody slides something mean across the table wearing a joke for a coat. My cousin Brett stared into his mashed potatoes. My aunt pressed a napkin to her mouth. I didn't laugh. I didn't look away either. I set the casserole down between the rolls and the green beans. Straightened my back. Looked right at him. Honestly, best I've felt in years. Ever since I stopped paying your bills. The room went flat. Not quiet. Flat. Like somebody had cracked a window open and all the air in the house had walked out. My mother, Linda, froze with a serving spoon halfway to her plate. A little clump of stuffing slid off and dropped back into the bowl. She didn't notice. She didn't even blink. My father, Howard, jerked so hard his chair legs scraped a long, ugly streak into the floor. He didn't apologize. I don't think he even heard it. Damon's smirk didn't fall all at once. Came apart in pieces. The eyes went first. Then the corners of his mouth. Then the jaw. By the time the whole picture caught up with him, he looked younger than I'd seen him in 10 years. Smaller too. "What bills?" my father said. His voice came out hard. "Rachel, what bills? Why are you paying anything for your brother?" That was the second the night stopped being a holiday. No more turkey. No more football murmuring out of the den. No more polite back and forth about who got promoted and whose grandbaby was walking now. Just a table full of people staring at a man they'd spent years calling brilliant, slowly starting to see something underneath that they didn't recognize. I hadn't driven up there planning to do any of that. I'd been carrying his lies so long I'd almost forgotten what my own back felt like without them on it. I'd let him shrink me at every dinner, every birthday, every Christmas just so he could stay tall in the picture. But the second he said the word useless in front of everyone I'd grown up with, something inside me stopped moving. And once that part of me went still, there was no version of this night where Damon walked out clean. In the beginning, sending money to Damon still felt like loving him. One rent check stretched into a power bill. The power bill grew teeth and turned into a car payment. Then a credit card minimum he swore had only spiraled because of one rough month. Every time I thought we'd hit the bottom, he'd find a new floor underneath. He packaged the next ask the same way every single time. This one was the last one. He was this close to an offer. He had 3 interviews lined up. Some recruiter out of Charlotte was supposed to call him back any day. He just needed a thin slice of time to keep his life from cracking open where Howard and Linda could see in. The reasons rotated. The pressure didn't. And neither did the rule he kept whispering at me, soft and tight as a leash. "Don't tell Mom. Don't tell Dad. Please, Ratch. Don't make this worse than it already is." He knew which strings to pull on me. When shame worked, he used shame, said he could barely look at his own face in the bathroom mirror anymore. When guilt worked, he used guilt, said I was the only person on the planet he trusted. And when neither one cracked me open, he reached for fear. Said Dad would never look at him the same. Said Mom would unravel and drag the rest of us with her. Said if I actually loved him, I'd let him fix it in private. I wish I could tell you I shut it down early. I didn't. I kept writing the checks because I'd told myself I was buying him runway. What I was really buying was his right to keep his reputation intact while I quietly took the hits in the dark. The cost showed up in small, ordinary places. I dropped my gym. I stopped grabbing dinner on the way home from late shifts. I started stretching a bag of rice farther than any 30-something operations manager should have to stretch a bag of rice. I picked up every extra warehouse audit my boss offered. I told myself I could hold this a little longer. Just till Damon caught his footing. Just till I could breathe out. My body stopped believing me before my brain did. His name lighting up my phone made my stomach pull in on itself before I'd even read the text. I started waking up at 3 in the morning with numbers running laps in my head. His rent, my insurance, his credit card, my car tag, his next disaster. The tired I felt wasn't the kind of weekend fixes. It was the kind that lives behind your ribs and turns even a quiet Sunday into something heavy you have to carry around the house. I tried more than once to push back. One Tuesday night after he called asking for what he called networking expenses. And yeah, you can already hear how that lands. I told him maybe it was time to bring Mom and Dad in. I said if Howard knew, maybe he could help him build a real plan. I said if Linda knew, maybe the secret would stop chewing holes in me. Damon went Arctic. He asked if I was trying to humiliate him on purpose. Said I had no clue what it felt like to lose your career, and then watch your own sister gear up to finish the job. Before I could even open my mouth, he kept rolling. Said I'd always envied him. Said this was probably the moment I'd been waiting for my whole life. A front row seat to him going under. It hit me sideways. I couldn't get a word out for a full breath. Then he softened his voice. Just enough. Just enough to make me start doubting my own motives. He said he was drowning and I'd somehow turned it into a conversation about my feelings. Said he never should have leaned on me if I was going to act like the rest of them. By the time we hung up, I was the one saying sorry. That was his whole shape. Push me until I doubted what kind of sister I even was. Then step back half an inch so I'd feel like a monster for asking for air. While that was happening, my life kept narrowing. I was losing the thread at work. I'd sit in ops meetings and realize 3 minutes in that I'd missed everything because I'd been bracing for his next text. Started making small clerical mistakes I never used to make. Nothing that cost a contract yet, but enough to scare me. Enough to put a low hum of dread under my workday. The cruel part was that nobody around me knew why I was fading. They just saw a woman who looked permanently underslept and a little far away. Damon wasn't paying any of that price. I was. And every time I let myself picture telling the truth, I could hear him in my ear, calm and cold, reminding me that if Howard and Linda found out, I'd be the one who tore the family in half. For a long stretch of months, that one sentence was enough to keep me locked inside his arrangement. Then on a regular Wednesday, I saw something on my phone that started rotting every excuse he'd ever fed me. All at once. The first crack in Damon's story came from a piece of evidence so small almost anybody would have thumbed right past it. I was at my desk eating a sad spinach salad I'd thrown together that morning, only half tasting it, when his name popped up in my feed. A story he'd posted and yanked back down inside about 90 seconds. I caught it on the back end of that window, one screenshot. Nothing flashy. A betting slip. Team abbreviations down the left side. Point spreads. A 4-digit number near the bottom. And a caption underneath in his usual cocky tone. Something about making smart plays while everybody else just watches. I put my fork down. That wasn't rent. That wasn't a phone bill. That wasn't a man clawing back to a paycheck. That was a man at a roulette table with my name printed on his chips. I called him that night. When I asked about what I'd seen, he laughed about half a beat too fast. Told me it wasn't gambling. It was sports investing. Said it was strategy, not luck. Said I was getting hysterical because I'd never thought about money outside a direct deposit. That last line was peak Damon. Even with his back flat against the wall, he still needed to sound like the smartest person on the call. Part of me wanted to swallow it, but something underneath my ribs had already shifted, and I couldn't shift it back. A few days later, I called Noah Bennett, certified financial planner. I'd known him since our state school days. Not the kind of guy who bends the truth to make people feel better. I didn't lay out every piece. Just gave him the outline. Sports betting. Big losses. Phone calls at strange hours. The same sentence on repeat, one more move and I'll be even. Noah didn't pause. He said people losing serious money on those platforms all run the same script. They call it a system. They swear they're one bet away from being whole. They ask the people closest to them for one more chance, and then one more, and then one more until the chase becomes the entire shape of their life. I sat in my car after that call with both palms flat on the steering wheel, staring straight through the windshield at a Kroger parking lot that wasn't really there to me anymore. For 4 years I'd been telling myself I was a sister keeping her brother alive. And right then, in that parked SUV, a different sentence walked in and would not walk back out. What if I wasn't keeping him alive at all? What if I was the one buying the bullets? Once that question moved in, I started noticing patterns I'd trained myself not to see. Damon texted at strange hours. Sometimes he sounded electric, sometimes hollowed out, sometimes both inside an hour. He'd talk about opportunities that didn't quite add up on a napkin. His emergencies were always tied to a window. Tonight. In the next 2 hours. Before midnight. Before they close it out. Bills don't behave like that. Panic does. Then the other voices started coming in. My Aunt Denise called me on a Tuesday afternoon, using that careful voice people use when they're already pretty sure of the answer they're about to get. She asked gently if Damon was doing okay. I asked her why. She admitted, after a pause, that he'd borrowed from her a few months back and made her swear she wouldn't say anything. He'd told her it was temporary. He'd told her he was embarrassed. He'd told her he just needed to bridge a gap. I knew that script word for word. A week later, my cousin Megan dropped it almost like a joke, that Damon had hit her up last summer asking if she could float him some cash. Then my Uncle Paul said something on the phone about Damon going through a stretch and being good for it soon. Each one landed like another door clicking shut behind me. He hadn't only lied to me. He'd been running a quiet, careful operation across the whole family, isolating every single one of us with a tailored confession so none of us would ever sit down together and add up the numbers. And it had worked for years because Damon understood shame the way a locksmith understands tumblers. He knew how to make silence feel like kindness. He knew how to turn a basic question into a betrayal. The last piece dropped on a Sunday afternoon at my parents' house. Howard was out in the garage, sorting through tool drawers and labeling storage bins, the way he did every fall before the cold rolled in. He mentioned, almost as small talk, that Damon had asked him recently about pulling early from his retirement account. I went so still that even my dad picked up on it. When I pressed him, gentle and slow, he admitted he'd already moved money to Damon. Not out of checking. Not out of some side envelope. Out of his retirement. The money he and Linda had spent 41 years stacking up. Brick by brick. He tried to wave it off. Just helping the boy through a stretch, he said. But I could barely hear him over my own pulse banging in my ears. That was the second the picture finally finished putting itself together. Damon hadn't been surviving a setback. He'd been running a private lending ring through the people who loved him, while wearing the costume of the son who had everything dialed in. He used my paychecks to chase his losses. He used everyone else to patch the leaks. And he still found the energy at every family dinner to look at me like I was something he'd stepped around on the sidewalk. I drove home that night with my jaw locked, opened my laptop at the kitchen island, poured one finger of bourbon I never actually drank, started building a file. Every Venmo, every Zelle, every text, every excuse with a date stamp on it, every promise, every lie. If Damon had been running his life like a one-man stage show, I was done being the quiet stagehand keeping his lights on. After Damon slammed the storm door behind him, the house settled into a strange kind of stillness. Not silence exactly. The fridge was humming. The football game was still going in the den, talking to an empty couch. A timer on the oven went off and nobody got up to deal with it. But the room itself had gone quiet in the way rooms do after something gets said out loud that can't ever be unsaid. Nobody went back to the table. The turkey sat half-carved on the cutting board, juices pooling on the wood. Linda's green bean casserole cooled on the counter under a sheet of foil nobody was going to lift. My Aunt Denise rinsed glasses at the sink without speaking. Her hands just moved on their own. My mother cried quietly while stacking plates that had barely been touched. My father stood at the head of the table with both palms pressed down on the back of his chair, looking at the open folder the way a man looks at a flooded basement, trying to count how much had been ruined right under his feet without him ever noticing. I stayed because walking out felt wrong, but I didn't know how to put any of it back together either. For years I'd been carrying this private belief that if I just absorbed enough, stayed steady enough, kept my mouth shut long enough, I could keep this family from splitting straight down the middle. That night taught me the opposite. All the way down to the bone. What had been breaking us wasn't the truth. It was the lie we'd all been forced to live inside of, in our separate little rooms, never comparing notes. The collapse came fast once nobody was left to soften it. Howard called Damon the next morning, before the leftover plates were even put away, and laid down one rule with the calm voice he used to use when I was 16 and had broken curfew. No more transfers. From any account. From him, from Linda, from anyone in the family. No more side conversations. No more private rescues. My mother, even with her eyes still red, did not flinch behind him. Word moved through the rest of the family quietly after that. Not as gossip, as correction. Each person finally lining their piece up next to everybody else's and seeing the whole picture for the first time. The loans stopped. The pity stopped. The little side deals he'd been running like a private bank stopped. And without all of us underneath him holding up the version of his life he'd been broadcasting, the whole structure came down inside of a month. He lost the apartment in the building he'd spent 2 years posting from. The leased SUV went next. My cousin Megan mentioned, in that careful voice people use when they don't want to sound satisfied about somebody else's fall, that he'd moved into a rented room on the western edge of town. The kind of address people end up at when both their money and their pride have run out at the same time. He picked up delivery shifts. He signed on with some commission-only sales outfit selling something nobody really wanted in the first place. None of it looked anything like the curated life he used to perform online. For a stretch he kept trying. He sent me a few bitter messages, then a couple of strangely upbeat ones a few weeks later, talking about a new direction, a fresh chapter. I didn't reply. I wasn't about to be the on-ramp back into the same loop that had almost run me into the ground. The last I heard from my father, Damon had been told there was exactly one condition for being part of this family again in any real way. Actual therapy. A gambling counselor. Open financials. No more curated story. No more polished image. Just the truth in plain language. Damon hated that condition more than he'd hated losing any of the money. Because the money was never the center of this. The center was control. The story he got to tell about himself. Who got to know what? Who he got to be inside other people's heads. The day he lost the ability to script us, he lost the only thing he'd ever actually been fighting to protect. As for me, my life didn't suddenly turn into something off a magazine cover. But it became mine again. And that turned out to be enough. I started sleeping through the night without lurching awake at 3 a.m. doing math in my head. I stopped flinching every time my phone lit up on the nightstand. I could sit through a whole ops meeting without some part of my brain quietly bracing for the next emergency. I was somehow expected to absorb on top of my own life. A few months in, my director put me on a regional expansion project. The kind of assignment I would have fumbled badly if Damon had still been pulling the rug out from under me every other week. Caught it cleanly. My savings account started climbing again. Slowly. Dollar by dollar. My apartment stopped feeling like a holding cell between his next crisis. The thing I didn't expect was what happened with Howard and Linda. The shape of us shifted. Got more honest. Less built on roles. They stopped looking at me like the steady one who'd quietly mop up whatever nobody else wanted to look at. They started seeing what that role had cost me. One evening on the back porch, Linda told me, with a tissue twisted up in her fingers, that she'd spent too many years confusing love with protection. She said keeping someone from their own consequences was never the same thing as loving them. She said it like she was apologizing to me and to herself at the same time. Howard said something shorter. And for him that meant more. He said he was proud of me for stopping. Not for putting up with it. Not for sacrificing. For stopping. I don't think I knew how badly I'd needed to hear that sentence until it landed. I never got the money back. Not in any clean, complete way. No court order. No payment plan. No satisfying envelope showing up in the mail. And some people, when I tell this story, fixate on that part. They want there to be a refund at the end. A scoreboard. But the honest answer is, by the time the dust settled, the money wasn't what I'd been fighting for anymore. What I'd been fighting for was my own name. My own peace. My own sleep. The right to walk into my parents' house and not be quietly known as the resource. The right to hear my name spoken at a family dinner without the word useless anywhere near it. I got all of that back the second I stopped helping him hide. This whole stretch of my life taught me one thing, it's this. Family love without limits doesn't turn into deeper love. It turns into a hiding place for whatever is rotting. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to keep paying for their lie. Sometimes the truth only feels cruel because people had gotten very comfortable with your silence. And sometimes the person in the family that everybody quietly calls the strong one isn't the loudest voice at the table. It's just the one who finally decides on a regular Tuesday afternoon, in a parked car in a quiet voice, that the cycle ends with her. If you've ever carried somebody else's financial secret until it started eating into your own life, your sleep, your work, your sense of who you are, then you already know exactly what I learned that year. A boundary is not a betrayal. It is self-respect said out loud with your own mouth for the first time.